it's LyndaCreates from LyndaCreates, and I have a super fun project that I made with my Stitcher stamps concept. And I use the Festive Collage stamp by Tim Holtz and stamped it on thrifted fabric, stitched it with a couple of simple stitches and vintage lace and some thrifted fibers, and did some unusual coloring on the fabric here to make it stand out. But I had a blast with this, and I can't wait to share how I made this. So let me bring it up a little closer. So check out how I made this. So I tore a piece of white cotton. I believe it's about 5 inches by 6 inches. And I tea dyed it and let it sit in some tea to make it a little less bright white. And I wanted a little bit more color, so I took some distress ink and went around the edges slightly. But then I realized around the raised parts of the wrinkles in the fabric, I gently put a little bit of ink on those areas as well to give it a little more character. And I'm going to go iron it now and see how that looks. So now there's no wrinkles, but because the ink is on this applied to where it was raised, it still has a nice distressed look. So I have 11-inch square piece of fabric in the background. I have a scrap piece of a looser weave in a natural color. And you can see when I say a scrap piece, it already had something cut out of the center. So I'm using the Tim Holtz Festive Collage stamp, and I want to use this one, the poinsettia. So that's what I'm going to use. I chose this cotton because it is a very even weave, and I tore the edges because it just tears beautifully. So I think I will stamp that there. Okay, and I'm using the Ranger Archival ink in jet black and the stamping block. Now, let me explain something here. This time I want the ink to show on the outside edges, and I don't want the flowers to be too heavy because I'm going to embroider over the flower and the leaves, so I don't need it to be that dark, but I do want the words on the outside to be dark enough, if that makes sense. Let me move that, because one thing I have to say, you never want to have your ink too close to your fabric until you're ready to go. So, because they are going to stay visible. Should have worn gloves. There we go. So I wanted all this to show up, and I'm going to be trimming or stitching over the flower. So you can see where it didn't stamp as clearly right there, but that is okay because I'm going to be stitching over that part. So now that I have it all stamped, it is not stitched down yet, so I'm trying to be very careful that it doesn't move. I pulled out some Christmas colored fibers that I have. My DMC floss, brand new. This is also thrifted. So I'm going to put them together, see what I get. And it sounds like the tree trimmers are chopping up a whole bunch of tree bits. I've stopped the couching of that piece, and since it goes up and gets very thin up here, I decided to continue with the embroidery floss and do a split stitch. So it's just going to go to there. So couching this, I went up with 2 strands of the floss. I'm starting on the leaves. I'm going to stitch with 6 strands of the darker green. So I'm coming out here. And because I'm doing the larger number 3 needle and I'm going through this thinner fabric, it is going to be a little stiffer. I did the center line, my first stitch, and now I'm coming down on opposite sides and coming up on opposite sides and going back down just in the middle, just below. And I'm trying to be careful to cover any of this or the ink from the stamps, and I'm also catching the tail of the thread behind. And I'm following the center vein, where the vein of the leaf would be, down the middle. As you're working down, you want the center vein, you can see it kind of coming up here, to line up with where the stem is coming in. Now, here's a good thing to follow the reference. If you look at the stamp, I was going to put the leaf in front of the stem, but it actually goes behind. I think I can stop there on that leaf. So just as you might shade this area, a leaf of a stamp with different shades of green, you do the exact same thing with embroidery floss. It's just that you shorten some stitches and add the lighter color to fill in, but you're constantly thinking in the same way you would if either you're coloring it with markers or coloring it in with floss. So I'm leaving some areas on all of these dark green leaves so that I could come back in with the lighter green or the medium green. So that's where I'm going to stop with the dark green leaves. And I'm coming up right here at the base of this little branch. And like I did up there, I'm going to do a little split stitch coming up until I get to the leaves that I'll fill in the leaves. right now I'm just shading in these leaves. Now working with 3 strands of the lighter green, and I am just coming in and doing the thinner stems and doing a little bit of highlights as well. This leaf looked a little too thin, so I'm just going to touch it up a bit. That's what I love about embroidery too, is that the choice of stitch makes a big difference, and the color makes a big difference, and the number of threads makes a big difference. So there's so many ways to add variety to the pattern that you're stitching or the design that you're stitching. And with something like stitching a stamp, which normally you would color, and there's different techniques to color it, but with embroidery there's just so much more dimension you can play with. Another nice thing about embroidery is that it can either be very, very structured or it can be very free form. Okay, I'm going to stop there with the leaves, and I think I will come back in with the flowers. So if you see on the flower, this area is actually the top facing part of the flower, and then this part is more in the shadow. So I'm going to use the lighter red up here and then the darker red to do that shadow. And because there isn't any other stitches around it, I started the floss over here so I don't have to tie a knot, and I'm going to come around, and because I'm stitching over this area in back, it will catch it and sort of self knot itself down. Over here there were stitches already, so they kind of held each other in place. But when you're starting in a new area, you kind of want to cross behind it, catch it on the back side. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so when you turn over, you could see I'm stitching over this tail. So the part that's sticking out on top is right here, and as I'm stitching, I'm crossing over it, so I'm holding it in place. So again, I don't have to tie a knot, and eventually I could cut this top part off so it's not in the way. But until I get to that point, it's going to just keep catching itself in back. So I'm just doing a satin stitch. And let me check it real quick in back. So I've pretty much held down all of that stitch, the tail of it, so I can reverse it back to this side. And because the front side's getting in my way, I can cut it off, pull it back through. So now it's gone. So I'm just going to continue this satin stitch down. I have this flowered petal to work on, and it is a little faint, so I'm going to take my friction pen and give it a slight helping hand. Okay, so that's where I'm going to take this. We'll start at the top. and I'm doing a leaf stitch. I finished all of the light red parts of the flower petals, so now I'm coming in with the darker red. Again, 6 strands, and I'm using a slightly larger needle than I have been, just to make it a little easier to go through the layers and the tighter weave. So now, looking back at my reference, I'm going to do this darker part right along here, going to be the turned up shadow. The other thing I want to do is also do the stitches going in a different direction because it's folded up. Okay, so I want to start right here. Okay. So that I don't have to tie a knot. Taking it through behind a couple of existing stitches, going inside that loop, and doing one more stitch. I'm starting right here, and I am going in this direction. So I finished this flower, and I'm going to add the shading on this petal next, and I'm going to do it in the same, let's see, I have it attached at the back already. I'm going to do it also going in this direction, but I'm going to do it a much more drastic angle to stand out a little bit more. So I'm starting at the top here. So I've started on this area here with the darker red. It is the shading in this area. So I'm doing a very, well, you could see on this one how this angle really worked well to contrast with that. So I'm doing a sharp angle to contrast with this. I'm just going to keep filling that in. So there's that shading. Okay, so now I have a little bit of shading here, and then we'll decide what these petals look like, if they're leaves or petals. You know what, I'm going to use 3 strands. Everything else I've used 6 strands so far, except for the couching on this main stem. So because the center is a little more delicate, I'm going to go with 3. I'm going to do a lazy daisy stitch. I'm doing it with 3 strands. I'm going to do an upside down lazy daisy stitch only because I want it to be wider at the bottom and narrower at the top. So okay, I'm going to do one more upside down lazy daisy stitch here. So the nature of the flower makes it more difficult up here. It's not the stamp and it's not the stitching part, it's that the flower itself has 3 different types of yellow in the center here, 3 different shapes. There are little little tiny leaves, which I did with the upside down Lazy Daisy stitch. And then there are miniature leaves, which are like these bigger leaves, but just small, and they're yellow, which is really interesting. And then there are the little seed pods. So it's just something you have to think about, what are these shapes going to be and what color. This isn't what you normally do with the Lazy Daisy stitch, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to come back up and I'm going to fill in the center here with just one little stitch. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'll come back with 6 strands, or with more yellow, after I fill in the leaves. I think I know what I want the other leaves to be, and I needed to do this yellow first to get an idea of where it was going. There's a little bit of the center yellow. So I'm going to start with this flower here. And the only reason I'm doing it dark red is because it'll add a nice contrast. I just have this light green leaf right here. So I have added the red leaf, added the green leaf. I'm going to go in now and do the French knots in the center. And what I'm using is 3 strands, but I'm going to double it up. And there's no technical reason for that, except I had 3 strands sitting around. So that's what I'm going to use. And it will come out to be a 6-strand French knot. I'm just going to do 3 wraps. Pull it kind of tight on the left hand there. And then go back down. Now, I have some little red seed beads. So I'm going to change to my smallest needle, and I'm going to use a single strand red floss and tiniest needle, middle of the French knot, single strand of floss. You can see and these are all my thrifted beads as well, which makes it kind of another little aspect of crafting that makes it less expensive and good for the environment. Let me take it out of the hoop.
So this is the end of part 1, where I did the inking, stamping, and embroidery. So please stay tuned for part 2, where I'll show you how I mounted it and did some slow stitching to finish it off. So please check out my website, LyndaCreates, that's Lynda with the Y, L-Y-N-D-A, LyndaCreates.com for more inspiration, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!